How's it going, guys? It's your boy Kanji FPL and welcome back to the channel. Unfortunately, my camera is actually not going to be working on my laptop, so I'm going to have to send it in for repairs. Hopefully it'll be fixed for next week, but you'll just have to bear with me for this week without my camera. I'd like to start off by reviewing how Game Week 4 went, and it was pretty underwhelming for most of the FPL community, where you're seeing lots of very good FPL managers getting pretty massive red arrows, but somehow I actually secured a very small red arrow, but red arrow is a red arrow nonetheless. I'm falling from 3.4 million to 3.6 million, so my rank is very, very poor. In fact, I actually looked back at some of my historical ranks, and I looked back at last season, and at Game Week 4, I was actually ranked in the top 20k. So to be sitting at 3.6 million, oof, it's like a dagger to the heart, but it can only really go up from here, right? Hopefully, at least. So I had two transfers this week where I did Adam Armstrong to Joao Pedro and Muniz to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So Armstrong to Joao Pedro was a 0-pointer into another 0-pointer somehow. Joao Pedro actually picked up a knock during international break that was unreported, but there was news that he actually trained, so hopefully he's going to be available for Game Week 5. And Muniz to DCL was actually a +5 move, where Muniz was actually benched and got a 1-pointer, and DCL went out there against Aston Villa away from home and scored to pick up 6 points with no bonus because he missed too many other big chances. So I'm looking at that DCL move, and I'm happy to own him over the longer term because he has Leicester, Southampton, and Ipswich in the next 5. And even over the course of the season, I think DCL is just a much better pick, given that he's also on penalties and will start every game for Everton. So I'm happy that I made that move. However, there has been news about DCL where he's picked up an illness and he may not be available for Everton, but I really doubt that. I just think that he was benched for the FA Cup. I mean, think about it from Everton's perspective, where they've picked up 0 points over the first 4 weeks of the season. They're definitely going to be in a relegation battle. There's no point shying away from saying that. And they also have Branthwaite out. So that means that with Branthwaite out, they'll be very poor defensively. And if they risk DCL, and he's kind of an injury-prone player, so if they lose him, then they'd have pretty much no attack as well as having no defense. So I think that they rested DCL in the FA Cup match, and Sean Dyche is just making up excuses. So I'm not really worried about DCL personally, but let's wait for the press conference to hear another update on that. Unfortunately, there was an injury to Alexander Isak, and Isak is one of the most unreplaceable players in FPL. There are no strikers in this league that I really trust to bet against Haaland with, apart from Alexander Isak, who's a 90-minute man on the penalties and has no Europe. Like, he has the perfect combo, and that's why I really wanted to be owning Isak for 38 weeks this season if I decided to go against Haaland. But if Isak is going to be out for any sort of period of time, it almost locks in my transfers of just selling Isak to bring Haaland in Game Week 7. But for now, I just feel like because of the nose injury and the blurry vision and the fact he hasn't been in training so far this season and the fact that I can't trust Eddie Howe for a truthful update in the press conference, I'm probably just going to start Isak, but I'm not expecting much from him. If Isak is benched, I don't expect him to be subbed on. I think he'll either get 90 minutes or 0 minutes, so I'll probably just start him in my FPL team and hope for the best. But worst case scenario, I'm hoping that Joao Pedro and Calvert-Lewin are both going to be fit and available for this game week, and it doesn't put me in a very difficult position for Game Week 5. Moving on to the midfielders in my team, Saka loves playing against Spurs. Of course, he returned against them. Bruno also returned against Southampton. Not surprised there as well. Salah blanked at home to Nottingham Forest. I know that would sound surprising to most people, but I didn't captain him. I knew that there was going to be a low haul on the cards for Salah, so to see him blank is really surprising, but I knew he wasn't going to haul this week, so I'm not really that disappointed. I knew this result was definitely in the realm of realistic expectations for me. Seeing Eze also blank at home to Leicester was very disappointing, especially given the fact that Henderson also blanked at home to Leicester, so Palace have been very poor to start the season, but I don't think anything has really changed in the way that I look at Eberechi Eze. Yes, we noticed that Mateta took the penalty away from him. I think Eze goes from being an essential pick to a good pick. Yes, he's only going to be taking 50% of the penalties, but he's going to be a 90-minute man for Palace. He's on all the corners. He's on the direct free kicks and the indirect free kicks. Like, Eze is a very good FPL pick. He's a really good hygiene pick, and I think I'd like to hold him over the course of the season if he doesn't get injured, but it's very disappointing to see him blank at home in such a good fixture. Lastly, we had Antoine Semenyo, who picked up a 1-pointer, picking up a yellow card in the 95th minute, which is annoying, but a blank away at Chelsea is not really that surprising, but it's disappointing to see another blank in my squad. Moving on to my defense, I've always known that I was going to be starting Lewis Dunk 4 weeks in the first 20, where I was going to be starting him in Game Week 4 and Game Week 5, where Saliba plays against Spurs and Man City, and Dunk plays against Ipswich at home and Nottingham Forest at home. I also plan to start Dunk in Game Week 9, where Saliba plays against Liverpool, and in Game Week 13, where Trent plays against Man City. So it's good to know that in the first of 4 starts, he's already gotten me 1 return. I'm only just hoping for 1 more return in the next 3 starts that I start him. Hopefully, he can give me that instant gratification once again and give me a return in Game Week 5, but really happy to be getting that 1 return from my differential immediately. Moving on to Gabriel, who has been my hero. If you've been following my channel for a while, you've known that I haven't owned any Arsenal defenders last year, and this year I wanted to make them my hero. It's really hard to be betting against Arsenal defense. Honestly, they're just so consistent. But a 15-pointer for Gabriel was more than I ever dreamed of, but it was definitely in the realm of realistic possibilities. Spurs have been struggling to score goals, and they have a massive weakness from set pieces, so I was never planning on benching Gabriel, not in a million years. In fact, I only plan to bench Gabriel in probably 2 fixtures this year, where they play against Liverpool and Man City, but apart from that, I'll probably just play Gabriel every single week, because he always has the access to a clean sheet, even in the tougher matches, because Arteta looks to set up in a very defensive manner in bigger games, so I would really trust Gabriel even in the bigger games, and he always has the threat through set pieces. So I really like Gabriel as a season-long asset. And Trent went out there against Nottingham Forest and blanked as my captain. Now, I was on the verge of a very good week if I had just gotten a 6-pointer from Trent. That's all I needed. But unfortunately, he blanked as my captain, which put me behind all of the teams that just have Haaland captain and blanks across the squad somehow. But that's just how the cookie crumbles. I had really researched this pick for my captain, where Trent had gotten 9 returns versus Nuno in the Premier League in 6 starts, and I was really hoping for at least 1 return, but it just didn't really work out for me, where Hudson-Odoi went out there and did Hudson-Odoi things, where he scored from the top left corner, a classic Hudson-Odoi goal. I've seen Alisson save that so many times, but he didn't come up clutch for me this year, and that's okay. I love Alisson, so hopefully he'll be able to make the next save next time around. But because Trent has Alisson behind him and Van Dijk behind him cleaning up the mess, that just what makes Trent such a good FPL pick, and that's why I had the guts to captain him, but it didn't work out this time, and that's just how the cookie crumbles. Overall, I received a score of 48 points with a game week rank of 6.3 million, which is pretty meh. But overall, it's been a pretty underwhelming start to the season, and I've already used 2 transfers this week. So going into Game Week 5, I only have 1 free transfer. And let's actually quickly jump into the watch list to see if there are any FPL players that are standing out in the Premier League that we can look to bring in. Welcome back to the watch list, and jumping right into the forwards, there have been a couple of changes based on what's happened in Game Week 4. Wissa and Muniz have both disappeared from the watch list, and for 2 different reasons. Wissa is going to be out for the next 2 months with an ankle injury. Muniz has actually been dropped by Fulham, so he's actually going to be dropped from my watch list as well. I'm not sure who's going to be starting between him and Raul Jimenez, so I'm just going to be avoiding the Fulham strikers in general. Mateta has been given a rise from the 3rd tier to the 2nd tier, and for good reason. He dispatched his penalty for Crystal Palace, and it does seem like there's going to be a 50% penalty share between Mateta and Eze. Longer term, I'm not sure who's going to be on the penalties, but it's just good to know that there is another viable striker option in FPL. The fixtures for Crystal Palace are pretty mixed, where they play against Man United and Liverpool in the next 6 weeks, but when the fixtures turn for Crystal Palace around Game Week 18, he could be a potential option to consider, but in the short term, I'd rather be on other strikers that have better fixtures, like the likes of Jamie Vardy or Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Speaking of Jamie Vardy, he actually went up in the tier list from the 4th tier to the 2nd tier just based on how good his fixtures are, playing against Everton, Ipswich, and Southampton in the next 6 weeks. He's very affordable. He's really consistent, and the thing is with the Premier League, there's going to be lots of space in behind defenses because lots of defenses like to use a high line, and that just suits Jamie Vardy perfectly. So he's going to be a very solid option over the course of the season if he can stay fit. There is the threat of Owen Edouard, who came from Crystal Palace, who I'm sure will pick up at least 20 minutes at the end of games, and will probably rival Jamie Vardy to take some of the starting chances away from him, especially given his age. And if Jamie Vardy picks up any injuries, I'm sure Edouard will be starting. But I'm not sure if we can really trust Edouard, and I think Vardy for now has been the talisman for Leicester for multiple seasons, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. The last change has actually been a drop of Evan Nielsen from the 3rd tier to the 4th tier, just based on the fact that he missed his penalty for Bournemouth, and he's not going to be a 90-minute man for them as well. So if you're not on penalties and you're not playing 90 minutes, I'm not sure I can have you in the 3rd tier. The reason why he's been dropped is because he missed the penalty, meaning that I think their next penalty will probably go to Kluivert. So I'm just not going to be a big fan of Evan Nielsen, especially with his fixtures coming up against Liverpool, Arsenal, and Man City in the next 6 weeks. We really don't need to be going there. Moving on to the midfielder watch list, there has been a quick update where Odegaard has disappeared from the list because of the injury that he's going to be picking up. That's going to keep him out for 2 months. And Luis Diaz has received a drop from the second tier to the third tier because of the rotation risk that he possesses. Arne, the Liverpool coach, came out in a press conference and mentioned that he could have dropped Luis Diaz for Cody Gakpo, but he actually didn't. And he started Luis Diaz in the Prem, benched him for the Champions League, and it puts Luis Diaz in a good position to start the next game against Bournemouth. But the fact that he considered dropping Diaz for Gakpo just shows you the amount of rotation risk that Luis Diaz possesses. So I don't really be holding on to him longer term. I don't own him personally, but if there is anyone else that does, I would recommend selling him after game week 5, moving on to the likes of Brandon Bumo or Jared Bowen moving forward. In general, Palmer and Son have just been so underwhelming. Palmer picked up 0.1 xg, which is terrible last week, and Son has basically been invisible in every game apart from the Everton match. So it's the likes of Palmer's and Sons that really need to step up in order for us to consider going against Haaland. But at this moment in time, given how underwhelming the premiums have been, it seems like all roads really lead back to Erling Haaland in game week 7. Maybe the emergence of somebody like Phil Foden could take some of the goal share away from Erling Haaland, but for now, it does seem like Haaland is the best player to be bringing into your team just based on captaincy stability, where you can just trust him to get at least one return on a weekly basis. If you're going to be considering any budget midfielders, I'd be on Morgan Rogers or Dwight McNeil, but personally, I think Dwight McNeil is just a much better pick. He has some of the set pieces, so he has direct free kicks, indirect free kicks, as well as the corners, whereas Morgan Rogers has none of those. But Morgan Rogers has slightly more goal threat, where I think he had his first shot on target this game week, but he's just been assisting Ollie Watkins, and that's kind of similar to what McNeil has been doing, but I just trust McNeil. And I think, yes, Aston Villa will score more goals, but there is more rotation risk with Rodgers, given that they're also in the Champions League. And I look at McNeil, where he's kind of the star boy for Everton, and they have really good fixtures, playing against Leicester, Ipswich, and Southampton in the next 6 weeks. So I would prefer McNeil in the short term and in the longer term, but if you're, strapped for cash and you need to save the extra 0.5, Morgan Rogers is a solid choice as well. There's been a small update to the defender watch list, and Alex Moreno has been added in from Nottingham Forest. In game week 4, Nottingham Forest had a very strong defensive performance versus Liverpool. The coach, Nuno, always has a defensive first mindset, so I think I would actually trust Nottingham Forest defensively. Their underlying data for expected goals conceded this season actually puts them in the top 5, and last year, over the course of the season, they were 4th for expected goals conceded, so they have very good underlying data. And Alex Moreno picked up 3 assists last year for Aston Villa in 20 matches, so I'm assuming that if he played 38 games, he'd probably pick up at least 5 attacking returns. So I think there is around at least 15 returns for Alex Moreno over the course of the season. So I think he can represent a very good value buy at 4.4 in FPL. However, I do feel like I actually own at least 4 of the 5 best defenders in FPL, given that I own Leif Davis, Lewis Dunk, Trent, and Gabriel. I feel like Trent and Gabriel should be at the top of everyone's wish list. Those two just feel like the best assets in the game. Of course, Trent is going to be a luxury own at this point, given that Liverpool's fixtures are turning for the worse, and Trent is pretty expensive at 7.0. But to me, I think Trent could be a season-long hold. It really just depends on the structure that you decide to go with. If I go for a no Haaland structure, I would likely hold Trent for the whole season. But if I look to bring Haaland in, I think I'll have to sell Isak and Salah, and I'm going to need to find an extra 1.5. I'm either going to have to sell Bruno Fernandes or Trent Alexander-Arnold, and my initial thought process is that I should lean towards selling Trent, just because Bruno could be a season-long set-and-forget option, and I think United are just very underrated, if I'm honest, and I think I love Trent. I'm a Liverpool fan, but I'm not sure it's worth paying 7.0 if I have to bring in somebody like Haaland and I need to spend the funds elsewhere. Moving swiftly forward, this is what my Game Week 5 team selection looks like, and I actually have the luxury of benching my Arsenal players, where I have Gabriel and Saliba away at the Etihad, and I can bench them first and third on my bench. And I have the luxury of starting Leif Davis away at Southampton, who's actually picked up a goal and a clean sheet in the last 2 weeks, so I'm cautiously optimistic for a return away at one of the worst teams in the league. I'll also be starting Lewis Dunk, who's going to be at home to Nottingham Forest. I'm expecting a very low scoring game, so I'm optimistic for a clean sheet in that fixture. And lastly, I have Trent Alexander-Arnold, who has multiple routes to points, especially at home, where he has a chance for an attacking return off any set piece or from open play, and he has a chance for a clean sheet, however low that I expect that to be, given that Bournemouth have been very solid on offense. But I don't want to be starting Antoine Semenyo, even though I own him, because he's going to be attacking the Virgil van Dijk side of the Liverpool defense. So I'm going to be benching him, and he's second on my bench and not first, even though he is an attacker. Moving on to the attackers, I'm actually going to be starting 7 different penalty takers for the respective clubs, which makes me very happy to say. And I'm going to be starting with Bukayo Saka, who's going to be away at the Etihad, and I'm not really expecting any sort of attacking return from him. There's a chance, of course, for an attacking return from a set piece or in the counter attack, but I'm not expecting many goals from that game, so it's probably going to be a blank this week. Then I own Bruno Fernandes and Eberechi Eze, so I'll be watching that game and hoping for goals. And I've got Mo Salah at home to Bournemouth, and he is the best captain option of anyone in the game this week. So happy that I own him, especially from a safety perspective. And hopefully those players that have Erling Haaland, hopefully they'll be able to get a blank, and I'll likely just be able to get 3 points from Saka. That'll be the dream. But just happy to own the best captain option this week in Mo Salah, and I can sleep comfortable going into game week 5. Moving on to my strikers that are all flagged, and these are actually real flags. Like when I look at the Bukayo Saka yellow flag, it's not a real one. That's just how Saka is. He's almost always going to have a yellow flag on him. But when I look at Calvert-Lewin, Isak, and João Pedro, they all are flagged for different reasons. Calvert-Lewin has a flag because of a flu, João Pedro has a flag because of a knock and he missed the last game, and Isak has a flag because of a potential eye injury and a potential foot injury. So I don't really know if any of them are going to be starting. I'll just be praying that at least 2 of them will start, and I'm cautiously optimistic about that, so not really worried too much. I think Calvert-Lewin was rested in the FA Cup. I think he's going to be fit and available. João Pedro actually trained this week, so I'm hoping that he'll just get the nod from the coach to just start once again. I'm just hoping that the Brighton coach benched João Pedro last week as a preventative measure of João Pedro picking up a long-term injury, just given that he had a knock coming off the international break. So hoping that he's going to be fit and available, given that he's back in training. So he's going to be in my starting 11. Alexander Isak is the one that I'm really worried about, given that the coach will actually not give me any realistic information about him either. So I could potentially consider transferring out to somebody like Jamie Vardy, but for me, I just really want to hold on to Isak over the course of the season. So let's hope that he's going to be fit and available. But if not, I'll just be getting somebody like Gabriel off the bench and hoping that at least 2 of my strikers will be fit and available to play this week. I know when you look at my overall team, there are a lot of flags, but I don't really think there are major issues. Happy to be starting 7 different penalty takers. I really like the fixtures for my defenders as well, and Henderson is probably just going to blank. I'll be hoping for saves in that fixture. So overall, I really like my team for game week 5, and I'm cautiously optimistic for a green arrow, especially given that Haaland is the main threat to me and he has a very difficult fixture. So really excited for game week 5. Hopefully I provided some value to you over the course of this video. If I did, please just hit the like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all again soon. Peace.